60 Minutes Rewind.
Dr. Jack Kevorkian, who has acknowledged helping more than 130 patients kill themselves, tonight reveals that 2 months ago he killed one of his patients himself and recorded it on videotape. And he acknowledges that this killing could get him sentenced to prison for the rest of his life. Dr. Kevorkian has been tried and acquitted 3 times on the charge of assisting suicides, but this is different. He himself does the killing. The videotape you will shortly see will disturb some of you, but Dr. Kevorkian, who brought us this tape, says he wants to use this case to move the public debate from doctor-assisted suicide to euthanasia, death triggered directly by a doctor. Dr. Kevorkian says that's what he did to Tom Yoke, a victim of Lou Gehrig's disease. In a few minutes, you will actually see Dr. Kevorkian end this man's life. First, though, we'll tell you why Mr. Yoke wanted Dr. Kevorkian to do it, and why the doctor wanted you to see him do it, even though it could get him charged with murder.
You killed him.
I did, but it could be manslaughter, not murder. It's not necessarily murder. But it doesn't bother me what you call it. I know what it is. This could never be a crime in any society which deems itself enlightened.
Tom Yoke led an active life. He restored and raced vintage cars. But 2 years ago, at age 50, he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, a devastating, incurable illness that destroyed his muscles. He lost the use of his legs and then his arms. His family says he was in terrible pain, had trouble breathing and swallowing, and was choking on his own saliva. So they wrote Dr. Kevorkian, who lives nearby, and he videotaped his first meeting with Tom.
Can you move your legs at all?
Yeah.
How about your left arm? Try. That's all you can do? You can't lift your hand off the thing now.
Trying to talk to Tom, you learn how bad he was. He couldn't also make intelligible words. Barely intelligible.
Barely. From the tape, you could see barely.
Right.
What is your religion?
Bad thing.
Do you have any children? Okay.
And you could see him breathing, gasping, leaning back every time he tried to talk. He couldn't utter more than a few syllables at a time because of the weak muscles. And he was terrified of choking. Terrified.
Up to now, Kevorkian says he's helped people to die by having the patient flip the switch to start the lethal drugs flowing. And Tom could have done that. But Kevorkian suggested that instead, he give Tom a lethal injection. He says that's more reliable and more humane, and he wants to push the public debate from doctor-assisted suicide to euthanasia.
Did Tom know that you were making, in effect, an example of him?
Yes.
He did?
Yes. And I sensed some reluctance in him. I did.
Because he thought he was getting assisted suicide.
That's right. And actually, this is better than assisted suicide. I explained that to him. It's better control. Then he did agree, which I think I didn't force him to agree. He did agree.
How do you know he agreed?
I had him signed saying that he chose direct injection, and he signed it.
Okay, now I'm going to read it to you, Tom, and I want you to understand. I want to make sure you understand it, and you got to listen closely and stop me if you can't understand it. This reads this way: I, Thomas Yoke, the undersigned, entirely voluntarily, without any reservation, external persuasion, pressure, or duress, and after prolonged and thorough deliberation, hereby consent to the following medical procedure of my own choosing, and that you have chosen direct injection, or what they call active euthanasia, to be administered by a competent medical professional in order to end with certainty my intolerable and hopelessly incurable suffering. Did you understand all that? Okay.
Tom signed the statement and thought he was about to die, but Dr. Kevorkian wanted to postpone it to give Tom more time to think it over.
You're sure you thought about this very well now? You don't want to wait another month or so? You want to wait a week? How about 2 weeks? 2 weeks? 1 week? Can you wait 1 week?
Yeah.
All right, at least we'll stretch it out 1 week, okay? Let's not hurry into this.
But I got a call the next night from his brother saying, Tom wants it now. And I couldn't say, well, no, I'm going to make you wait a week.
Well, what was happening?
He just was terrified and he was very afraid of choking to death. And he must have felt that he was on the verge of it. And I couldn't have him suffer in that kind of frame of mind, because if the man is terrified, it's up to me to dispel that terror.
Mm-hmm.
So 2 nights after the first visit, Dr. Kevorkian returned. The family had been told to leave before he arrived to avoid possible criminal charges as accessories.
Tom, do you want to go ahead with this?
Yeah.
Shake your head yes if you want to go. All right, I'm going to have you sign again your name, and we're going to date it today, okay? And we're ready to inject. We're going to inject in your right arm. Okay? Okay.
First, the doctor gave him Seconal to put him to sleep quickly.
Sleepy, Tom? Tom, are you asleep? Tom, are you asleep? You asleep? He's asleep.
Then he injected a muscle relaxant to stop his breathing.
And this,
Paralyzes the muscles.
but he's still alive at this
He's still alive, but, and that's why
I can see him breathing just a trifle.
that's why I have to, yes, now, you see, now the lack of oxygen is getting to him now. But he's unconscious deeply, so it doesn't matter.
Is he dead now?
He's dying now because his oxygen's cut off. He can't breathe. So I'll now quickly inject the potassium chloride to stop the heart.
Now there's a straight line.
He's dead.
Yep, the heart is stopped.
Straight line, the cardiogram will be turned off.
After more than 130 cases of assisted suicide, Dr. Kevorkian says this is the first time that he taped the moment of death. And he says he did it to force his own arrest for euthanasia, so he can have a trial to finally resolve whether he is right or the prosecutors are.
The story will continue after this.
Either they go or I go.
What does that mean, they or I go?
If I am acquitted, they go, because they know they'll never convict me. If I am convicted, I will starve to death in prison. So I will go. One of the two of us is going to go. And that's why I did this. The issue's got to be raised to the level where it is finally decided.
You were engaged in a political, medical, macabre publicity venture, right?
Probably.
And in watching these tapes, I get the feeling there's something almost ghoulish in your desire to see the deed done.
Well, it could be. I can't argue with that. Maybe it is ghoulish. I don't know. It appears that way to you. I can't criticize you for that. Mm-hmm. But the main point is the last part of your statement, that the deed be done.
Tom's family, his wife, Melody, brothers, Terry and Bob, and his mother, Betty, all say Tom was a fighter, but that he finally decided he needed Dr. Kevorkian.
I was so grateful to know that someone would relieve him of his suffering. I don't consider it murder. I consider it humane. I consider it the way things should be.
And I take it that you would not be sitting here unless you thought it was useful, socially useful, to have this broadcast.
Absolutely. We were at the end of our rope. We didn't have any options. Mm-hmm. And if it weren't for Dr. Kevorkian, I'm not sure what we would have done.
You want Tom to be, forgive me, a poster boy for euthanasia?
Oh, exactly not. Tom is very private. And also he believes it's a private issue. You should be able to do what makes sense to you. And I'm shocked that it's come to this, that in the 90s, we have to make such an issue out of something that a person should be in control of their own life and death.
But Dr. Mark Siegler, director of the Center for Medical Ethics at the University of Chicago, watched Dr. Kevorkian's tape with me, and he was appalled.
We're watching a medicalized killing.
Right.
I was shocked, almost speechless, as we watched the tape. It was such a frightening spectacle.
Siegler sees little difference between assisted suicide and euthanasia, and he is against them.
There are many of us who are worried that that legalizing or permitting euthanasia is dangerous to patients and dangerous to society.
Why? It certainly was not dangerous to this patient.
Well, I mean, patient is dead.
Yes, he's
Patient
dead.
is dead.
He wanted to be dead. He signed a letter twice suggesting, nay,
Yeah.
acknowledging that he wanted to die at the hands of Dr. Kevorkian.
Yeah. And the heart-wrenching case is the hardest case to argue against. I guess the arguments against it is that we can do better than kill people when they're near the end of life. We can do better with end-of-life care.
So Dr. Siegler says those who want to die should be made as comfortable as possible, but he says euthanasia poses a threat to society's most vulnerable people.
Euthanasia for the mentally incapacitated, euthanasia for the physically incapacitated, euthanasia for infants and children who can't act themselves.
Dr. Kevorkian says he's focusing on euthanasia that is demanded by the patient, and he is not worried about possible abuse.
Everything can be abused. You learn from abuse, you punish the abuser. And then you, if you want to control, you say only certain doctors can do this in certain areas, nobody else. Got that? That's a way to control it.
The medical examiner called Tom Young's death a homicide, a term that he's used before for assisted suicides. Kevorkian told us the authorities probably do not know that this was euthanasia. He says the medical examiner suspects that he was involved, but 2 months after the death, the police have still not questioned him about it. He gave us the tape, he says, to force their hand.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've got to force them to act. They must charge me. Because if they do not, that means they don't think it's a crime. Because they don't need any more evidence, do they? You have to dust for fingerprints on this?
Kevorkian sees euthanasia as a fundamental American right, part of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
If you don't have liberty and self-determination, you got nothing. That's what this country is built on. And this is the ultimate self-determination, to determine when and how you're going to die when you're suffering.
And those who say that Jack Kevorkian, Dr. Death, is a fanatic?
Zealot. No, not a fanatic. Sure, you try to take a liberty away and I turn fanatic. That's what I'm fighting for me, Mike, me. This is a right I want when I'm 71, I'll be 71. You don't know what will happen when you get older. I may end up terribly suffering. I want some colleague to be free to come and help me when I say the time has come. That's why I'm fighting, for me. Now that sounds selfish, and if it helps everybody else, so be it.